I was sitting in the conference room at Sterling Capital Partners, hands shaking slightly, as I signed the final page of the acquisition agreement that would change my life forever. My manufacturing company, a business I had built from scratch over 7 years producing specialized industrial equipment for construction sites, was being acquired for $8.2 million, $5.1 million of which would go directly to me after investors and employees got their shares. It was late afternoon on a Thursday, almost 5 o'clock, and I had just become a multimillionaire, had just validated years of sacrifice and risk, had just proven that the crazy idea I had pursued despite everyone's doubts was actually worth something substantial. The Sterling partners shook my hand, congratulated me on building an exceptional operation with real market value, and told me the wire transfer would hit my account within 48 hours. I walked out of that building feeling like I was floating, my phone already out to call my wife Diana and share the news that would change everything for us. She didn't answer the first call, which wasn't unusual since she worked as a marketing manager and was often in meetings during late afternoons. I left a voicemail. "Baby, it's done. We closed the deal. I can't believe it actually happened. Call me back as soon as you get this. I want to tell you everything and we need to celebrate tonight. I love you." I was grinning like an idiot walking to my car, already planning how we would spend the evening. Maybe that expensive restaurant she always wanted to try. Champagne, talking about all the things we could finally do, now that money wasn't a constant source of stress. The drive home took 30 minutes through rush hour traffic, but I barely noticed because my mind was racing through everything this acquisition meant: paying off our mortgage, buying Diana the car she wanted, taking that trip to Italy she had been dreaming about, maybe even starting a family now that financial pressure wasn't crushing us. I pulled into our driveway just before 6 in the evening, still riding the high of the biggest achievement of my professional life. The house was quiet when I walked in, which struck me as odd because Diana's car was in the driveway and she should have been home from work by now. "Diana," I called out, setting my briefcase down by the door and loosening my tie, ready to find her and share the incredible news face to face since she still hadn't called back. No response. I walked through the living room toward our bedroom, noticing her purse on the kitchen counter and her work laptop bag on the dining room table, clear signs she had been home for at least a little while. As I got closer to the bedroom, I heard sounds that made my stomach drop and my steps slow, voices low and intimate and the unmistakable rhythm of movement that could only mean one thing. My hand froze on the bedroom door handle, my brain refusing to accept what my ears were telling me, desperately trying to find an alternative explanation that didn't involve what I knew I was about to see. I opened the door anyway, some part of me needing confirmation even though I already knew. Diana was in our bed with another man, both of them naked, and so absorbed in what they were doing that they didn't immediately notice me standing in the doorway. The man was someone I didn't recognize, younger than me, fit, probably around 28 compared to my 36 years. It took about 3 seconds for Diana to realize I was there, and when she did, her eyes went wide with shock, and she pulled away from him with a gasp that sounded almost theatrical. "Michael! Oh my God, you're home early. I thought you were in meetings all day." Her attempt to frame this as a timing mishap, rather than a deliberate betrayal, was so absurd that I almost laughed, but nothing about this moment was funny. The man scrambled to cover himself with our bedsheet, looking between Diana and me with the panicked expression of someone who had clearly not been told I existed, or at least not been told I might come home at this exact moment. I stood there frozen, watching my wife and a stranger in my bed on what was supposed to be the best day of my life, and felt something fundamental break inside me. "Get out," I said, my voice coming out surprisingly calm despite the chaos exploding in my chest. "Both of you. Get dressed and get the fuck out of my house." The man didn't need to be told twice. He practically jumped out of bed, grabbed his clothes from the floor, and started pulling them on with frantic speed, while avoiding any eye contact with me. Diana, meanwhile, pulled on a robe and started talking rapidly. "Michael, please, this isn't what it looks like. We can talk about this. I made a mistake and I'm so sorry. Please, just give me a chance to explain." But I held up my hand to stop her, not wanting to hear whatever justification or manipulation she was preparing. "I don't want to hear it. I want you to get dressed, pack whatever you can fit in your car right now, and leave." We'll deal with the rest later, but you're not staying here tonight. The man finished dressing and literally ran past me out of the bedroom, and I heard the front door open and close within seconds as he fled the situation he had just helped create. Diana stood there in the robe, tears starting to stream down her face, her hands shaking as she reached toward me in a pleading gesture. Michael, please don't do this. I know what you saw looks terrible, but it's not what you think. He means nothing to me. It was just a stupid mistake. I don't even know why it happened. Her words were coming out in a desperate rush, but they sounded hollow and scripted, like she was reading from a cheater's playbook rather than expressing genuine remorse. How long? I asked, my voice still eerily calm even though I felt like screaming. How long has this been going on? She hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know before she even opened her mouth to answer. "A few months," she finally admitted in a whisper. "Maybe 3 months. But Michael, it didn't mean anything. I was just feeling lonely because you've been so busy with the business and—" I held up my hand again, cutting her off before she could finish that sentence. "Don't you dare blame this on me working hard to build something for our future," I said, anger finally starting to break through the shock. "I've been grinding for 7 years to make this business successful, to create the kind of financial security you always said you wanted. And today, the day I finally close the deal that makes it all worth it, I come home to find you fucking another man in our bed. Do you understand how insane that is?" She was sobbing now, makeup running down her face, looking pathetic and broken in a way that might have moved me if I hadn't just watched her betray everything we had built together. "I'm so sorry," she kept saying over and over like a broken record. "I'm so sorry, Michael. I love you. Please don't throw away 10 years of marriage over this. We can work through it. I'll do anything." But her words meant nothing, because actions had already spoken louder than any apology ever could. "Pack your things and leave," I repeated, my tone making it clear this wasn't a negotiation. "I need you gone so I can think clearly about what happens next." She started to protest again, but something in my expression must have convinced her that pushing further would only make things worse. She went to the closet and started pulling clothes off hangers with shaking hands, stuffing them into a suitcase while continuing to cry, and occasionally glancing at me like she was hoping I would suddenly change my mind and tell her to stay. I stood there watching her pack, feeling nothing but numbness spreading through my chest, where earlier there had been joy and excitement about sharing my success with the woman I loved. 20 minutes later, she was dragging her suitcase toward the front door, pausing one more time to try, "Where am I supposed to go?" I shrugged, genuinely not caring about the answer. "Call your sister, get a hotel, go back to that guy's place for all I care. Just don't be here when I wake up tomorrow." The door closed behind her, and I heard her car start and drive away, leaving me standing alone in the house we had shared for the past 6 years. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of my own breathing and the ticking of the clock on the wall. I walked back to the bedroom, looked at the unmade bed where my wife had been with another man just 30 minutes ago, and felt a wave of disgust so intense I had to leave the room before I did something destructive like set the mattress on fire. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of whiskey even though I rarely drank hard liquor, and sat down at the table with my phone in front of me. There were 3 missed calls from my business partner, congratulating me on the acquisition, 2 texts from my lawyer confirming final details, and 1 message from my accountant about tax planning for the windfall. Everyone wanted to celebrate my success, and I was sitting here alone processing the fact that my marriage had just imploded on what should have been the best day of my life. I didn't sleep that night, just sat in the living room drinking whiskey and staring at nothing, my mind cycling between rage and grief and disbelief. How long had she been planning this? Had she been with him this morning before I left for the closing meeting? Had she been texting him while I was signing papers that would make us millionaires? The timing felt deliberately cruel, like the universe had decided to balance my professional victory with personal devastation, to remind me that you can't have everything. Around 3 in the morning, I finally moved from the chair to the couch, lying there in the dark trying to make sense of how the best and worst moments of my life had collided in the same day. The acquisition money would hit my account in 2 days, transforming me financially in ways I had barely begun to process, but the marriage I had thought was solid had been revealed as a lie, built on a foundation that cracked the moment I wasn't looking. I had won everything and lost everything in the span of 2 hours, and I had no idea which feeling was supposed to win. The next morning came grey and cold, despite it being late spring, matching the bleakness I felt inside as I forced myself off the couch and into the shower. I stood under the hot water for almost 30 minutes, trying to wash away the image of Diana with that man, trying to reset my brain to process everything that had happened in the past 12 hours. My phone was blowing up with messages from friends and business contacts who had heard about the acquisition and wanted to congratulate me, but I couldn't bring myself to respond to any of them because what was I supposed to say? Thanks. I'm a multimillionaire now, but my wife was cheating on me, so it's kind of a mixed bag. I got dressed in fresh clothes, threw the sheets from our bed into the trash because I couldn't bear the thought of ever using them again, and sat down at my home office desk to figure out what came next. First priority, call my lawyer and start divorce proceedings before Diana had time to strategize or try to manipulate the situation in her favor. My attorney, Richard Morrison, answered on the second ring and immediately launched into congratulations about the sterling deal before I cut him off. Richard, I need you to start divorce proceedings against Diana. Today, if possible. The silence on the other end lasted about 3 seconds before he recovered his professional composure. I'm sorry to hear that, Michael. What happened? I gave him the abbreviated version, came home from closing the biggest deal of my life, found my wife in bed with another man, kicked her out immediately. The timing is important here, I continued, my voice steady despite the emotion churning underneath. The acquisition closed yesterday afternoon before I discovered the infidelity. I need to make sure that's documented clearly so she can't argue she's entitled to half of the acquisition proceeds. That money represents 7 years of work that happened during our marriage, but her betrayal happened on the same day we closed, and I want to fight for every dollar. Richard's tone shifted to strategic problem-solving mode as he assured me he would file immediately and work to protect my interests as aggressively as possible. Diana started calling around mid-morning, but I sent every call to voicemail without listening to the messages. She texted, "Michael, please talk to me. I'm staying at my sister's and I'm devastated. Can we please meet and talk through this like adults?" I finally responded, "My lawyer will be contacting you about divorce proceedings. Any communication from this point forward should go through legal counsel. Don't contact me directly." Her response came quickly. "You're really going to throw away our entire marriage without even talking to me first, after everything we've been through together?" I almost laughed at the audacity of trying to guilt me for not wanting to talk after what she had done. I typed back, "You threw away our marriage when you decided to sleep with someone else. I just discovered it yesterday. There's nothing to talk about." Then I blocked her number because I didn't need the distraction or the manipulation attempts while I was trying to process the wreckage and plan my next moves. The acquisition money hit my account 48 hours later, exactly as Sterling had promised, and seeing that balance go from approximately $47,000 to $5,147,000 in a single wire transfer was surreal in a way that would have been purely joyful if not for the context surrounding it. I stared at those numbers on my bank app for a long time, feeling nothing like the elation I had anticipated for years. This money represented validation of all the risk and sacrifice and late nights and stress I had endured to build something valuable, but it also represented the end of my marriage and the death of the future I thought I was building with Diana. The wealth felt hollow and incomplete, like receiving a trophy for winning a race, but finding out your running partner had been sabotaging you the entire time. I transferred $1 million to a high-yield savings account, another $1 million to an investment account I opened with a wealth management firm, and left the rest in checking while I figured out what to do with resources I had never imagined having. Money was supposed to solve problems, but it couldn't solve the fundamental problem of being betrayed by the person you trusted most. The divorce proceedings moved quickly once they started, because Richard was aggressive and Diana's position was indefensible, given the circumstances of her infidelity being discovered. She tried to argue through her lawyer that she deserved half of the acquisition proceeds because the business had been built during our marriage, but my legal team countered with evidence of the affair having started months before the deal closed. argued that her betrayal constituted abandonment of the marital partnership, and threatened to make the details of her infidelity public record if she fought too hard. The strategy worked. She settled for significantly less than half, agreeing to $800,000 cash, the car she was driving, and walking away from any claim on the house or my future earnings from investments. It felt like a victory, in the sense that I had protected the majority of my assets, but it also felt empty, because the money couldn't undo the damage to my ability to trust, or the years I had wasted building a life with someone who didn't value what we had. The divorce was finalized 93 days after I found her with another man, and just like that, a decade of marriage was reduced to legal documents and a financial settlement. The months following the divorce were strange and disorienting, like living in a life that belonged to someone else. I was 36 years old, suddenly single after a decade of marriage, wealthy beyond anything I had planned for this stage of life, and completely unmoored from the future I thought I was building. I sold the house because living there felt like inhabiting a crime scene. Too many memories of Diana contaminating every room and making it impossible to move forward. I bought a modern condo in the city, furnished it with expensive minimalist furniture that looked impressive but felt impersonal, and tried to figure out who I was supposed to be now that all my previous markers of identity had been stripped away. The business was sold, the marriage was over, the future was blank. Some people would have seen that blankness as freedom, but to me it felt more like vertigo, like standing at the edge of a cliff with no map and no clear sense of which direction to go. I needed purpose, needed something to work toward that would give structure and meaning to all this newfound freedom and resources. I spent the first few months after the divorce doing absolutely nothing productive, which was both liberating and deeply unsettling for someone who had spent 7 years in constant hustle mode. I traveled to places I had always wanted to visit, but never had time for: Japan, Iceland, New Zealand, staying in nice hotels and eating at expensive restaurants and trying to enjoy the luxury that wealth provided. But traveling alone without someone to share the experiences with felt hollow, like I was going through the motions of what successful people were supposed to do rather than actually enjoying myself. I dated occasionally, went on apps and met women who were attractive and accomplished, but every interaction felt superficial because I had no interest in emotional connection so soon after being betrayed. The women could sense my emotional unavailability and usually moved on after 1 or 2 dates, which was fine with me. I wasn't ready to trust anyone with access to my heart again, maybe wouldn't ever be ready after what Diana had done. It was during one of those aimless evenings, sitting in my expensive condo drinking expensive wine and feeling miserable despite having everything money could buy, that I hit what felt like rock bottom emotionally. I had millions in the bank, complete freedom to do whatever I wanted, no obligations or commitments tying me down, and I was more depressed than I had been when I was broke and grinding 16-hour days to build my business. The success felt meaningless without someone to share it with, or something meaningful to work toward, and I was starting to understand that wealth without purpose was just a different kind of poverty. I walked over to the bookshelf, where I had a collection of business and personal development books I had accumulated over the years, looking for something that might spark insight or direction. I pulled out a book a business mentor had given me years ago that I had never fully read, The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. I opened it and started reading, and within the first chapter, I found a passage that stopped me cold. Change might not be fast, and it isn't always easy. But with time and effort, almost any habit can be reshaped. I read that sentence multiple times, feeling it challenge everything I had been thinking about my situation. I had been treating my post-divorce depression and aimlessness as permanent conditions, as fixed realities I had to accept and manage. But what if they were just habits, patterns of thinking and behaving that could be reshaped through intentional effort over time? What if the emptiness I felt wasn't because wealth was meaningless, but because I had built habits around achievement and goal-chasing without building habits around fulfillment and purpose? The book talked about habit loops, cue, routine, reward, and how understanding these loops allowed you to redesign your behavior systematically rather than relying on willpower or motivation that inevitably faded. I stayed up until 3 in the morning reading the entire book, taking extensive notes, and beginning to map out what habits I needed to build to create a life that felt meaningful rather than just successful. Not big dramatic changes, but small daily routines that could compound over time into transformation. The shift in thinking led me to completely redesign how I approached my days and my life. Instead of waking up whenever I felt like it and filling time with whatever distraction seemed appealing, I created a morning routine. Wake at 6 in the morning, exercise for an hour, read for 30 minutes, journal for 15 minutes about what I was grateful for and what I wanted to accomplish. Instead of eating whatever was convenient, I hired a nutritionist and meal prep service to build the habit of fueling my body properly. Instead of passively consuming my wealth through travel and purchases, I started systematically investing in early-stage manufacturing and industrial businesses, evaluating opportunities on a set schedule and making decisions based on clear criteria rather than impulse. The habits weren't glamorous or exciting, but they created structure and forward momentum that had been completely absent from my aimless, wealthy existence. Within 3 months of implementing these new routines, I felt fundamentally different, more energized, more purposeful, more like I was building something rather than just existing in the wreckage of what had been destroyed. The habits approach extended beyond just personal routines into how I thought about deploying my capital and energy. I started angel investing in early-stage manufacturing and industrial businesses, not randomly but systematically, evaluating 10 opportunities per month, doing deep diligence on the most promising 3, investing in 1 if it met my criteria. The system ensured I was consistently finding and backing interesting companies rather than just sitting on cash, waiting for perfect opportunities that might never come. Within 6 months, I had invested in 8 companies across various industrial sectors, providing not just capital, but also operational advice based on my experience building and selling my own manufacturing business. The work was intellectually stimulating and gave me a sense of purpose beyond just managing my own wealth, and several of the investments were already showing promising early traction. I wasn't trying to hit a specific return target or build a massive portfolio. I was just following habits that kept me engaged, learning, and creating value consistently over time. The personal transformation that came from implementing better habits was profound and visible. I dropped 20 pounds and got in the best shape of my adult life through consistent training. I became significantly more knowledgeable about business, psychology, history, and philosophy through systematic reading and reflection. I built a network of interesting entrepreneurs and investors through consistent outreach and relationship building rather than waiting for connections to happen organically. Most importantly, I developed emotional resilience and self-awareness through daily journaling and meditation that helped me process the betrayal and pain from the divorce without letting it define my entire identity going forward. I was becoming a different person, stronger, wiser, more intentional, not through achieving some dramatic transformation goal, but through showing up consistently to small daily practices that compounded over time. The habits were working exactly as the book had promised, creating results that were far more sustainable than any goal-based achievement could have provided. About 18 months after the divorce, I met someone at an entrepreneur networking event who would become significant in my recovery journey. Her name was Lauren. She had built and sold her own consulting firm, and we connected immediately over shared experiences of building businesses and navigating the weird psychological territory of sudden wealth. We started as friends, having coffee occasionally to discuss investments and business ideas, with no romantic pressure or expectation beyond enjoying each other's company and perspectives. That friendship was exactly what I needed at that stage: connection without vulnerability requirements, intellectual stimulation without emotional risk, proof that I could still relate to women without immediately thinking about betrayal or protection. Over time, the friendship deepened naturally, and about 6 months after we met, we started dating with the explicit understanding that we were both cautious, both protecting ourselves, both okay with taking things slowly without forcing a relationship narrative that neither of us were ready for. Dating Lauren was completely different from my marriage to Diana, in ways that were both refreshing and occasionally unsettling. Lauren had her own money, her own success, her own complete life that didn't need me to fill any gaps or provide any validation, She wasn't with me for security or status because she had built those things herself. She was with me because she enjoyed my company and valued the connection we had developed. That equality and independence created a relationship dynamic that was healthier than anything I had experienced in my marriage, but it also required me to show up differently, to offer emotional availability and genuine partnership rather than just being a provider or achievement machine. The relationship challenged me to develop parts of myself I had neglected while building my business, and through that challenge, I grew in ways that made me more complete as a person. We moved in together after a year of dating, not out of practical necessity, but because we genuinely wanted more time together, and the relationship continued to deepen based on mutual respect and authentic connection rather than need or compensation. The business world continued to evolve in interesting ways as my angel investment portfolio matured and some of the companies I had backed started showing serious growth potential. One manufacturing company I had invested early on was now generating significant revenue and attracting acquisition interest from larger strategic buyers. Another industrial supply company had developed a proprietary process that was creating competitive advantages in their market and positioning them for aggressive expansion. My involvement with these companies had evolved from just writing checks to becoming a strategic advisor who helped founders navigate growth challenges, make key hires, and think through long-term positioning. That active engagement was more fulfilling than passive investing because it allowed me to use the hard-won knowledge from building and selling my own business while helping others avoid the mistakes I had made along the way. The work gave me purpose and kept me connected to the entrepreneurial world I loved without requiring me to start another company from scratch or commit to the grinding intensity that had consumed my 20s and early 30s. It was year 3 post-divorce when my face ended up on the cover of a regional business magazine with the headline, "The Angel Investor Turning Industrial Underdogs into Acquisition Targets." The article detailed my investment track record, including the recent $18.7 million exit from the industrial coating company and my systematic approach to finding and supporting manufacturing businesses with breakthrough potential. The magazine was distributed widely across the business community, placed in airport lounges and corporate waiting rooms, and the online version got significant social media traction. I didn't think much about the publicity beyond it being good for deal flow and establishing credibility, but apparently the article reached someone from my past who had been following my success from a distance. 3 days after the magazine hit stands, I received a text message from a number I had deleted years ago but still recognized. "Saw your article. Congratulations on everything you've built. Would love to catch up if you're open to it. Diana." I stared at that text for a long time, my initial reaction oscillating between anger at the audacity and curiosity about what she wanted after 4 years of silence. I showed the message to Lauren, who raised her eyebrows and said simply, "She sees you're successful and suddenly wants back in your life. Classic. What do you want to do?" I wasn't sure what I wanted, but I decided to respond with cautious neutrality. "Thank you. I'm doing well. What did you want to catch up about?" Her response came within minutes, too quickly, like she had been waiting by her phone. "I know this is probably awkward, but I've been thinking about you a lot lately and would really like to see you in person if you're willing. Just coffee, nothing complicated. I have some things I'd like to say to you that are hard to put in a text." Against my better judgment and Lauren's gentle warning that this was probably a bad idea, I agreed to meet Diana for coffee the following week at a neutral location downtown. She arrived 10 minutes early, and I watched her through the coffee shop window before going in. She looked older, tired, less polished than I remembered from our marriage. The confidence and dismissiveness that had characterized her when she left me were gone, replaced by something that looked like anxiety and defeat. I walked in and sat down across from her, keeping my body language neutral and my greeting minimal. "Hi, Diana." She smiled nervously, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup, like she needed something to hold on to for stability. "Hi, Michael. Thank you for agreeing to meet me. I wasn't sure you would after everything that happened." We sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment before she continued. "I'm just going to be direct because I don't know how else to do this. I made the worst mistake of my life when I left you. I destroyed something real and good because I was chasing excitement and validating my ego, and I've regretted it every single day since. The confession hung in the air between us, and I felt nothing like the satisfaction I might have expected hearing her admit this. Instead, I just felt tired and wary, sensing where this conversation was heading, and not wanting to engage with it. "Okay," I said simply, not giving her anything to work with. She pressed forward, clearly having rehearsed this. "I know I have no right to ask this after what I did, but I wanted to know if there's any possibility that we could try again. Not right away. I understand you'd need time, but maybe we could start over slowly and see if we could rebuild what we had." The request was so absurd given the context that I almost laughed. "Diana, you cheated on me on the day I closed the biggest deal of my life. You destroyed our marriage for a fling that lasted, a few weeks. And now, 4 years later, you see an article about me being successful, and suddenly you want to try again?" She flinched at the directness, but didn't back down. "I know how it looks, Michael. I know you think I'm only reaching out because you're successful now, but that's not the whole truth. Yes, seeing that article reminded me of what I lost, but I've been thinking about you and regretting my choices for years. I'm not with anyone, I'm struggling financially. My career never recovered from the mistakes I made, and I miss what we had. I miss you." Her voice cracked with emotion that seemed genuine, and I could see tears forming in her eyes. But even watching her pain, I felt no urge to comfort her or give her what she was asking for. "I'm in a relationship, Diana. I've been with someone for almost 2 years now, someone who supported me through rebuilding my life after you destroyed it. Someone who values me for who I am, not for what I can provide or how successful I've become. So no, there's no possibility of us trying again. That door closed the day I found you in our bed with another man." The tears that had been forming in Diana's eyes spilled over, running down her cheeks as she processed the finality of my rejection. "Please don't say that. Please don't close the door completely. I know I hurt you terribly. But people make mistakes, Michael. Don't I deserve a chance to make it right?" Her desperation was palpable, but it only reinforced my certainty that reconnecting with her would be a catastrophic mistake. "You made your choice 4 years ago when you prioritized a momentary thrill over our marriage. I'm making my choice now to prioritize my own well-being and the healthy relationship I've built with someone who actually values me. Those aren't the same thing, Diana. One was selfish betrayal, the other is self-respect." She reached across the table like she wanted to grab my hand, but I pulled back before she could make contact. "What if I could prove to you that I've changed? What if I could show you that I understand what I lost and I'm not the same person who made those mistakes?" I shook my head, my patience for this conversation running out. "It doesn't matter if you've changed or not, because I'm not interested in finding out. So I've spent 4 years healing from what you did, building a new life, becoming someone stronger and happier than I was when we were married. Going backwards to explore whether you're different now would undo all that growth and accomplish nothing except reopening wounds that have finally closed." Diana was crying openly now, not bothering to wipe the tears away, her voice thick with emotion. "So that's it. You won't even consider the possibility. After 10 years of marriage, after everything we built together, you're just done?" Her appeal to our shared history only annoyed me, because it revealed how little she understood about what had actually happened. "Diana, you were done with our marriage the moment you decided to sleep with someone else. I'm just respecting the decision you already made." She shifted tactics, her desperation making her more direct than she probably intended. "Is this about money? Are you punishing me because I'm struggling financially while you're successful? Because I can accept that. I can accept being with you even knowing there's an imbalance. I just want another chance." The suggestion that I was punishing her, or that she would graciously accept being with me despite my wealth, was so backwards that it broke through my controlled composure. "You think this is about punishing you? Diana, I don't think about you enough to bother with punishment. You're not a villain in my story anymore. You're just someone who used to be important and isn't anymore. And the fact that you frame a potential relationship as you accepting an imbalance tells me everything I need to know about your motivation here. You're not trying to rebuild what we had. You're trying to attach yourself to my success, because your own life didn't turn out how you wanted." She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor and drawing looks from other coffee shop patrons. "That's not fair. You're making me out to be some gold digger when all I'm doing is admitting I made a mistake and asking for forgiveness." I stood up too, ready to end this conversation and leave. "I forgave you years ago, Diana. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation, and it doesn't mean giving you access to my life again. It means I let go of the anger and bitterness so I could move forward without that weight. You're forgiven, and we're done. I hope you find a way to build a good life for yourself, but that life won't include me." I turned to walk away, but her voice stopped me one more time. "What about her? This woman you're with, does she know you're meeting with your ex-wife? Does she know you still feel something for me, or you wouldn't have agreed to this coffee?" The attempted manipulation was so transparent it was almost sad. Lauren knows exactly where I am and who I'm meeting, because we have the kind of trust and communication that you and I never managed to build, even in 10 years of marriage. And I don't feel anything for you except mild sympathy and a lot of relief that our marriage ended when it did, instead of wasting more years together. I left the coffee shop without looking back, got in my car, and drove home feeling emotionally exhausted, but also clearer than ever about the life I had built and the woman I had built it with. When I walked in the door, Lauren looked up from her laptop and asked simply, "How did it go?" I sat down next to her and told her everything. Diana's appeal for a second chance, her tears and desperation, her accusations and manipulations, my firm rejection and final goodbye. Lauren listened without interruption, then pulled me close and said, "I'm proud of you for holding your boundary. That couldn't have been easy, but you did the right thing for both of us." That night, lying in bed next to someone who genuinely loved and respected me, I felt grateful for every painful step of the journey that had led me here. Diana didn't give up after that coffee shop meeting, despite my clear rejection and firm boundaries. Over the following weeks, she texted me repeatedly with messages that oscillated between apologetic and accusatory, pleading and angry, desperate and manipulative. "I know you said we're done, but I can't accept that after everything we meant to each other." Then, an hour later, "You've become so cold and heartless. The Michael I married would never treat me this way." Then the next day, "I'm struggling so much financially and emotionally. I have nobody else to turn to. Please just talk to me." I showed the messages to Lauren, who advised me to block Diana's number entirely rather than continuing to receive this barrage. "She's trying to find any crack in your boundary where she can wedge herself back into your life. Don't give her that opening." I blocked her number that evening, creating a clean separation that should have ended the situation entirely. But Diana found other ways to reach me, sending emails to my business address with subject lines like, "Please read this," and "I'm begging you." The emails were long, rambling manifestos about regret and second chances, and how unfair it was that I had moved on, while she was still suffering. One email in particular crossed a line that made me realize I needed to take more serious action. "I know where you live now. I drove by your house yesterday and saw you and that woman together through the window. She doesn't love you like I did. She's just with you for your money and success. I'm the only one who knew you before all this, who loved you when you had nothing." The suggestion that she had been watching my house was disturbing enough that I forwarded the email to my lawyer and asked what options I had for keeping her away. He recommended getting a restraining order if the behavior continued, documenting everything carefully in case we needed to pursue legal action. The situation escalated further when Diana showed up at a business conference where I was speaking, sitting in the audience and trying to approach me afterward as I was networking with other investors and entrepreneurs. I saw her coming and deliberately moved into a group conversation with several people, making it impossible for her to pull me aside for a private interaction. She hovered nearby for almost 20 minutes, clearly waiting for an opportunity, before finally approaching anyway and interrupting the conversation. "Michael, can I please talk to you for just 2 minutes? It's important." Everyone in the group looked uncomfortable, sensing the tension and awkwardness of whatever this situation was. I kept my voice calm and professional, but firm. "Diana, I've asked you multiple times to stop contacting me. We have nothing to discuss. Please respect my boundaries and leave me alone." She looked around at the group watching this interaction, her face flushing with embarrassment and anger, before she turned and walked away quickly. I apologized to the group for the disruption and explained briefly that Diana was my ex-wife who was having difficulty accepting that our relationship was over. Most of them were gracious and understanding, sharing their own stories of messy divorces and boundary violations that made me feel less alone in dealing with this situation. But the public nature of Diana's appearance at the conference was concerning because it showed she was willing to create scenes and disrupt my professional life in her desperation to reconnect. That evening, I called my lawyer again and initiated the restraining order process, providing documentation of all the unwanted contact, the disturbing emails, the showing up at my house and at professional events. The lawyer assured me we had more than enough evidence for a temporary restraining order and likely a permanent one if her behavior continued. She's clearly escalating, and you need legal protection before this gets worse, he advised. The restraining order was granted within a week, legally prohibiting Diana from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of my home or workplace. The restraining order seemed to finally get through to Diana in a way that my words never had, perhaps because the legal consequences made the situation real in a way emotional appeals couldn't. The texts and emails stopped immediately, and I heard through mutual acquaintances that she was devastated by the restraining order, but also finally accepting that reconciliation wasn't going to happen. One friend who had stayed in touch with both of us told me, "She's not doing well, Michael. She lost her contract work because the stress and obsession with getting you back was affecting her performance. She's broke, depressed, and isolated. Part of me feels bad for her, but another part thinks this is exactly what she needs to hit bottom and finally start dealing with her own issues instead of trying to use you as a solution to her problems." I felt sympathy for Diana's suffering, but also clear that maintaining distance was necessary for both of our well-beings. She needed to rebuild her life on her own foundation rather than trying to climb back onto mine, and I needed to protect the peace and happiness I had worked so hard to create. About 6 months after the restraining order was granted, I received an unexpected call from Diana's sister Maria, someone I hadn't spoken to since shortly after the divorce. "Michael, I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted to let you know what's happening with Diana because I think you should hear it from someone who cares about both of you." My first instinct was to end the call immediately, but something in Maria's tone made me listen. "Diana attempted suicide 2 weeks ago. She's physically okay now. She's in a psychiatric facility getting help, but it was serious. She took a bunch of pills, and if her roommate hadn't come home early, she probably wouldn't have made it." The news hit me like a punch to the stomach, bringing up complicated emotions I had thought were resolved. Maria continued, "I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty or to ask you to reach out to her. The doctors are clear that you maintaining distance is actually healthier for her recovery. I just thought you should know what happened." I thanked Maria for letting me know and sat with the information for a long time after the call ended, trying to process what I felt about Diana's suicide attempt. Guilt, definitely, even though logically I knew her mental health crisis wasn't my responsibility or fault. Sadness for someone who had been important to me once and was clearly suffering beyond what I had understood. Relief that she had survived and was getting professional help. And underneath everything, a renewed conviction that keeping boundaries had been the right choice. If I had given in to her appeals for reconciliation, it wouldn't have fixed her underlying issues. It only would have made me responsible for managing her emotional state while sacrificing my own well-being and relationship with Lauren. I talked through all of this with Lauren and with my own therapist, processing the complex feelings without letting them pull me back into Diana's orbit or make me question the decisions I had made. The suicide attempt marked a turning point in Diana's trajectory, at least from what I heard through Maria over the following year. The psychiatric hospitalization led to a proper diagnosis of depression and borderline personality disorder that had apparently been untreated for years, contributing to the impulsive decision-making and emotional volatility that had characterized her behavior. She spent 3 months in an intensive outpatient treatment program, started medication that helped stabilize her moods, and began doing serious therapy work on the underlying trauma and patterns that had led to the affair and the subsequent spiral. Maria told me that Diana was finally taking responsibility for her choices and their consequences, rather than blaming external circumstances or trying to use relationships to fix internal problems. "She's not the same person she was 6 months ago," Maria said during one update call. "She's actually dealing with her shit instead of running from it. I'm proud of her, honestly, even though it took hitting absolute rock bottom to get here." I was genuinely glad to hear Diana was getting help and making progress, but I maintained my distance and boundaries throughout her recovery process. The restraining order remained in place, and I had no direct contact with her, receiving only occasional updates through Maria when there was something significant to share. My life continued moving forward in positive directions that had nothing to do with Diana or her recovery. My investment portfolio crossed $80 million in value. As several more companies exited successfully, Lauren and I celebrated our second wedding anniversary with a trip to New Zealand, and my book about rebuilding after betrayal was optioned for a limited documentary series that would share the message with an even broader audience. Every success felt earned and authentic, built on foundations of healthy habits and genuine relationships, rather than on trying to prove something to someone who had rejected me. The contrast between my trajectory and Diana's was stark, and while I felt compassion for her struggles, I also recognized that our divergent paths were the result of choices we had each made about how to respond to pain and setbacks. It was almost 2 years after the suicide attempt when I received a handwritten letter, forwarded through my lawyer, sent by Diana, but screened to ensure it didn't violate the restraining order or contain anything manipulative or harmful. The lawyer called to ask if I wanted to receive it, and after some hesitation I agreed to read it. The letter was short, just 1 page, written in Diana's familiar handwriting, but with a tone I had never heard from her before. Humble, accountable, genuinely reflective rather than performatively apologetic. "Michael, I'm writing this as part of my recovery work, not because I expect or want a response from you. I want you to know that I finally understand the full magnitude of what I did to you and to us. I betrayed someone who loved me, on the day when you most needed support and celebration, because I was chasing validation and excitement instead of appreciating what I had. The consequences of that choice nearly destroyed me, and they should have. I've spent 2 years in intensive therapy dealing with my issues, and I'm finally becoming someone who takes responsibility for her actions instead of blaming others or circumstances." The letter continued, "I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness or reconciliation. I'm writing because my therapist says I need to take full accountability without expecting anything in return, and you deserve to hear that I know what I did was unforgivable. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. I'm rebuilding my life now on a foundation of honesty and self-awareness, instead of trying to use other people to fix my internal problems. I have a stable job, healthy friendships, and I'm learning to be okay alone instead of desperately seeking external validation. I hope you've found happiness, and I'm genuinely glad you had the strength to cut me out of your life when I was too sick to respect boundaries. That was the most loving thing you could have done for both of us. I wish you nothing but peace and success. You'll never hear from me again. Diana." I read the letter 3 times, feeling the genuine growth and accountability in her words, and for the first time since the divorce, I felt true closure about what had happened between us. I showed the letter to Lauren, who read it carefully before responding with her usual wisdom. "She sounds like she's actually done the work and taken responsibility. That's good for her, and it probably gives you some peace, knowing she's not still spiraling. But you don't owe her a response or any acknowledgement. This letter was about her healing process, not about restarting any kind of relationship." I agreed completely and decided not to respond, letting the letter stand as her final word and my silence as acceptance of her apology without opening any new communication channels. I filed the letter away in a box with other documents from that period of my life, artifacts of a painful chapter that had ultimately led to growth but didn't need to be revisited. Diana kept her promise. I never heard from her directly again, and the occasional updates through Maria became less frequent until they stopped entirely as we all moved fully into our separate lives. The years continued to unfold with steady growth and deepening satisfaction across all dimensions of life. My investment firm, which I had formalized into a proper fund with outside capital, grew to manage over $200 million across industrial and manufacturing companies. The returns were exceptional, averaging over 35% annually, which attracted more institutional investors and gave me increasing influence in the sectors I focused on. I was no longer just an angel investor writing small checks. I was a fund manager, deploying significant capital and helping shape the direction of entire industries. The work remained intellectually engaging and personally meaningful, providing purpose beyond just accumulating wealth. Lauren's consulting practice was thriving as well, and we had become a power couple of sorts in entrepreneurial circles, both successful independently, but even more effective when collaborating on projects that intersected our expertise. Our marriage was strong, built on mutual respect and genuine partnership rather than need or compensation. The documentary series based on my book premiered on a major streaming platform and became unexpectedly popular, reaching millions of viewers who connected with the story of rebuilding after betrayal and using pain as fuel for transformation. The visibility brought more speaking opportunities, more consulting work, more investment deal flow, and more messages from people sharing their own stories of setback and recovery. I hired a team to help manage the influx of opportunities and to run the foundation I had started, which was now deploying over $5 million annually to support first-time manufacturing entrepreneurs. The foundation had helped launch 43 companies that were collectively employing over 800 people and generating approximately $120 million in annual revenue. That impact felt more significant than my personal wealth accumulation, proof that success could be used to create opportunities for others rather than just consumed for personal benefit. Every founder we helped was someone who might not have gotten their chance otherwise, and watching them succeed felt like multiplying the gift I had received when my own company was acquired. I turned 45 years old, feeling more alive and purposeful than I had at any previous point in my life. The betrayal that had devastated me 9 years earlier had become the catalyst for building something far better than what I had lost. Diana's affair had destroyed a marriage that was probably doomed anyway, forced me to confront my own complacency and rebuild with intention, and ultimately led me to Lauren and to a life of meaning that went beyond just business success. The habits and systems I had learned from that book during my darkest period had indeed reshaped my entire existence, proving that change wasn't just possible, but inevitable when you committed to small daily actions that compounded over time into transformation. I had risen from the ashes of that terrible day when success and betrayal collided, not through revenge or bitterness, but through disciplined focus on becoming someone stronger, wiser, and more capable of building lasting value. And standing on the other side of that journey, I could finally see it clearly. Losing Diana had been the greatest gift she ever gave me, even though neither of us understood it at the time. It was year 10 post-divorce, almost a full decade since that devastating Thursday, when triumph and betrayal had collided, when I received news that brought one final piece of closure to the Diana chapter. Maria called unexpectedly on a Saturday morning, her voice carrying a mix of sadness and relief. "Michael, I wanted to let you know that Diana is getting married. She met someone through her therapy group, another person in recovery, and they've been dating for about 18 months. He's a good guy, stable, works as a carpenter, and they seem genuinely healthy together. She asked me to tell you because she wanted you to know she's finally found something real and sustainable, built on honesty instead of fantasy." I felt a genuine wave of happiness hearing this news, glad that Diana had found her way to something healthy after years of struggle. "That's really good to hear, Maria. I'm happy for her. Thanks for letting me know." We talked for a few more minutes before ending the call, and I sat with the feeling of completion that came with knowing we had both fully moved on. I shared the news with Lauren over breakfast, and she smiled warmly at my reaction. "You're genuinely happy for her. That's beautiful and shows how much you've healed. 10 years ago, this news might have brought up bitterness or comparison, but now you can just be glad she found her path." Lauren was right. I felt no jealousy or resentment, no need to compare Diana's carpenter husband to my own wealth and success. No lingering attachment that made her happiness threatening to my own. She was just someone who had been part of my story, who had inadvertently catalyzed my greatest transformation, and who deserved to find peace and stability after her own long journey through darkness. The fact that we could both be happy in completely separate lives, with no overlap or ongoing connection, felt like the healthiest possible outcome to a marriage that had ended so brutally. We had both grown, both learned, both built new lives on foundations of self-awareness rather than desperation or fantasy. The milestone of a full decade since the divorce prompted me to reflect deeply on everything that had changed and everything I had learned through the journey. The manufacturing company sale that had seemed like the pinnacle of success when I signed those papers at Sterling Capital had been just the beginning, a financial foundation that allowed me to build something far more significant. My current net worth approached $120 million through successful investments and compound growth, but the number itself mattered less than what it represented. Complete freedom to choose how I spent my time and energy, resources to create opportunities for others, proof that systematic habits and disciplined action could transform anyone's trajectory, regardless of starting point. The wealth was a scorecard, but the real victory was becoming someone who could generate value consistently, who had skills and knowledge that would remain valuable regardless of external circumstances, who had built a life of purpose and meaning that couldn't be taken away by betrayal or setback. I decided to write a follow-up book marking the 10-year anniversary, titled A Decade of Rebuilding: What I Learned from Losing Everything and Building Something Better. The book would update readers on what had happened since the first book, share deeper lessons about sustainable success and healthy relationships, and provide frameworks for others navigating their own rebuilding journeys. The writing process took 8 months, requiring me to revisit painful memories and examine my own growth with unflinching honesty. I wrote about the suicide attempt and restraining order with Diana, about building my relationship with Lauren, about the evolution from angel investor to fund manager, about using wealth to create impact through the foundation. I was more vulnerable in this second book than I had been in the first, willing to share mistakes and struggles that I had previously kept private. The vulnerability felt risky but necessary. People didn't need another sanitized success story. They needed truth about how messy and difficult real transformation actually was. The book launched to strong reviews and solid sales, resonating with readers who appreciated the honesty about setbacks and complications, rather than a fairy tale narrative where everything worked out perfectly after the initial crisis. I did a book tour across 20 cities, speaking to packed audiences who shared their own rebuilding stories and asked questions about navigating divorce, building wealth, creating meaningful work, and finding healthy relationships after betrayal. Every event reinforced the same truth. Everyone was dealing with some version of loss and rebuilding, and the people who seemed most successful had usually been through the most painful transformations. The speaking tour was exhausting but energizing, connecting me with thousands of people who were on their own journeys and just needed someone to show them that coming back from devastation was possible. By the end of the tour, I had spoken to over 15,000 people directly and reached millions more through podcast interviews and media coverage of the book. The impact felt exponentially greater than anything I could have achieved just through making money or building companies. Looking back on the entire arc from that devastating Thursday evening to this moment of reflection and peace, I could finally see the complete story with clarity that had been impossible when I was living through it. The betrayal that had shattered my world had been exactly what I needed to break free from a comfortable but limited existence. I had been playing small, building a decent business but not pushing for greatness, staying in a marriage that worked on the surface but lacked genuine depth and partnership, accepting good enough instead of demanding extraordinary. Diana's affair had destroyed that comfortable mediocrity and forced me to either collapse into permanent victimhood or rebuild into someone capable of much more than I had previously attempted. The pain had been real and severe, but it had also been the fire that forged steel from raw ore, burning away weakness and leaving something stronger in its place. The wealth I had accumulated was significant, but the real treasure was the person I had become through the journey. I was no longer someone whose identity depended on external validation or whose happiness could be destroyed by someone else's choices. I had built internal security through proven capabilities, developed emotional resilience through therapy and intentional growth work, created meaningful relationships based on genuine connection rather than need or compensation. Lauren and I had just celebrated our 5th wedding anniversary, and our marriage kept deepening in ways my first marriage never had, because it was built on 2 complete people choosing partnership rather than 2 incomplete people seeking completion through each other. We challenged each other, supported each other's growth, maintained healthy independence while building genuine intimacy, and created a relationship that enhanced our individual lives rather than consuming or limiting them. That partnership was worth more than all the money in my investment accounts. The foundation I had started was now my primary focus, having grown to deploy $8 million annually across manufacturing entrepreneurs who were building the next generation of American industrial companies. We had helped launch over 70 businesses that were collectively employing more than 1,500 people and generating over $300 million in annual revenue, creating economic opportunity and innovation that rippled through communities. Every founder we supported was someone who reminded me of my younger self, ambitious and capable, but lacking access to capital and mentorship that could accelerate their journey. Providing that support felt like the highest use of the resources and knowledge I had accumulated, more satisfying than generating higher investment returns or accumulating more personal wealth. The foundation would outlive me, continuing to create opportunities long after I was gone, turning temporary wealth into permanent impact. That legacy mattered more than any personal achievement or milestone. I sometimes thought about Diana and wondered how her life was unfolding in her marriage to the carpenter, whether she had found genuine peace and stability, or whether she was still struggling with the patterns that had nearly destroyed her. I hoped for the former, genuinely wanted her to be happy and healthy, but I also recognized that her journey was separate from mine now, and always would be. We had been important to each other once, catalysts in each other's stories, but we were no longer characters in each other's ongoing narratives. She had given me the gift of necessary destruction, and I had given her the gift of firm boundaries that forced her to deal with her own issues instead of using me as a solution. We had both learned what we needed to learn, and now we were both living the lives those lessons had made possible. There was no bitterness left, no resentment or anger, just acceptance of what had been, and gratitude for what had emerged from the wreckage. The day I closed the biggest deal of my life and discovered my wife's betrayal had seemed like the worst day imaginable, a collision of triumph and tragedy that left me devastated and broken. But standing here 10 years later, I could see it clearly for what it actually was. The best day of my life disguised as the worst, the catalyst that forced transformation I never would have chosen but desperately needed. The habits I had built in response to that pain, the systems I had implemented to create consistent growth, the relationships I had developed based on genuine values rather than convenience, all of it traced back to that terrible Thursday evening when everything fell apart. I had left Diana behind not through bitterness or revenge, but simply by building a life so compelling and purposeful that she became irrelevant to it, and I had become rich not just financially, but in every dimension that actually mattered. Meaningful work, genuine relationships, internal peace, lasting impact. The woman who cheated on me the day I closed my biggest deal thought she was choosing excitement over stability. But what she actually did was set me free to build something extraordinary. And for that unexpected gift, wrapped in the most painful package imaginable, I would always be quietly grateful.